Hello friends, today I'm walking you through my three-step process to plan a garden. Now it's the time of the year to really plan your garden and get ahead for a great season. So what are my three steps? The first one is to know what is your garden space and how much space do you have actually, which means we're going to measure the garden and really make sure that we have the right measurements to get started. Once we have the right measurements, we go to step 2, and that is adding a grid to your garden beds, a square foot grid, to help you with a square foot gardening method to really understand the spacing and how many plants you can actually plant in your garden. And then the third step is to decide what plants we're going to plant. That's the fun part, so that we're going for the seed catalogs and decide what kind of seeds we want to get for the next season and to grow on. So here I'm going just to simply measure my beds quickly. I know the big ones, those are 8x4, but with the bought ones I'm never sure. So I always want to make sure I have the right measurements here. That is 6.5 by 3.5. And of course it's also important to note those measurements down. We relocate inside. It was a little bit chilly outside. What should I say? Gardening in New England in January, right? So for step 2, what we're going to do once we take the measurements is we create a garden layout plan on a sheet of paper or in your garden journal, whatever you use, true to scale. This is important because that will help us really to make sure that everything is in a proper fit. And what we do once we have this laid out is to put a grid over it. So I'll show this here, how I do that in my digital garden journal. So I put a square foot grid, again, to scale on top of it to really see how many boxes of square feet I have to plant. What that enables us is to use the square foot gardening method. And this is a really cool method which helped me a lot when I started out gardening, because I was always wondering, like, what does the spacing mean on the seed package? It was always something where I struggled with. So the square foot gardening method took that hassle out of the equation for me, because what it does is, especially when you Google square foot gardening method, you'll get a lot of examples of what type of plant varieties you can put, or how many of a certain plant varieties you can put in 1 square foot. I have here some very common examples as well for you. But again, if the vegetable you want to grow is not on this list, Google will help you with this one. So what does it do for me is, so for my spring example with the peas and the lettuce and the radishes, what we can do there is now really easily calculate how many plants we want to put in 1 garden bed. My garden bed is 8x4, so I have 4 long rows and 8 short rows. And that really helps me to understand now how many radishes I can plant. With the square foot gardening method of like 16 per square, I gotta decide, do I want to put like basically 2 full rows of radishes in. I have a little bit of a smaller footprint there, but this really helps me to then calculate for that space how many radishes I need in total. And that of course correlates to the remaining vegetables I want to plant with the lettuce and the peas there as well. You might have noticed that I have less lettuce in there as I could fit in. That is just because they all mature around the same time and we just don't eat much lettuce, right? Keep those things in mind as well, to consider how they harvest and how they mature. Is it a big bang? Like the radishes all come around the same time too, but with the radishes they store well. I can ferment them, I can can them, we can roast them. We have many, many different ways to eat them. With the lettuce, it's a little bit more clean cut on what we do there in terms of eating. So for that reason, I'm a little bit more conservative. And then we go full blown in on the peas because we love the peas. The peas were always something what we really enjoyed in the previous years. So this year I'm honing down on the varieties we love, and they get eaten off the vine as a garden candy, but then also frozen, or maybe I'll try fermenting them, although I don't think that's an option. Anyway, so we'll see. Peas are a love stable and usually don't last long in this household. So now we made it to step 3, and step 3 is the fun part. That means seed shopping. What we do there is, now that we know how many plants we actually need for our garden this year. This is truly the fun part of going and browsing what kind of varieties we want to pick and grow along. But before you do that, let me give you a couple of pieces of information which will be helpful to make good picks for your garden. One thing is to consider is how long is your growing season? So what do I mean by growing season? This is determined by your last frost date in spring, which is typically the day which is the last frost in your area, so it's safe to plant out vegetables over there. If you don't know the last frost date, go to Google, put in last frost date and your zip code, and that is usually how you get this piece of information. For me, in my zone 6, this is around mid-May, so I typically calculate with the May 15th in my seed starting plants, so that has worked well for me. And then on the end of the season, this is your first frost date, and this is for me again around mid-October, and this marks in about 150-ish days of growing season for me. This is a very substantial growing season here in my northern climate, so I have a lot of options, which is nice. But for example, if you grow in a colder zone like a zone 5, 4, or even a zone 3, bless your heart if you do that. I couldn't do that. But this is truly where it is important to then think about what vegetable varieties you pick in terms of days to maturity. What does days to maturity mean? So this means typically when the vegetable is ready to be harvested first. Different varieties mean different things a little bit for the days of maturities. Let me pick my radish example again. So for the radishes, my typical radish I like to use is a French breakfast, and they are around 30 days to maturity. And when you think about radishes, they are a one and done crop, right? When you harvested them, they all get ready around the same time. So it's a one harvest and then they're done kind of crop. But when you think about a tomato, for example, or a cucumber or any type of squash, for example, the days to maturity is the days when you can expect your first harvest, but then they grow on through the season. So that is something to consider as well. So for my growing zone, I'm able to grow most of the common vegetables easily with my about 150 days. But there are a few things which are tricky. For example, a lot of gardeners love to grow loofah sponges, and they have in 140 days to maturity. And when you think about what I just mentioned with the growing on, this is cutting it short here for my area to be able to grow loofahs. I have theoretically 10 days of growing loofah left in my gardening season to produce a few. That is nothing what I would necessarily recommend, but I know a bunch of people trying it nevertheless. So do whatever you like to do in your garden, right? That is something very important as well. Everything what I recommend or tell you about is based on my experience. So please go ahead, make your own experience and take this with a grain of salt here. All right, so this was all I want to show you today for my 3-step process of really determine what I want to grow for 2023. What comes up in a video next will be how I then translate the seeds I bought into a nice seed starting plant. So for that reason, subscribe if you want to see that so that you get notified when I put up the next video. And yeah, thank you for being here and being on my garden journey. The dead of winter is a little bit boring because I guess we got to film a lot inside, but I'll promise from the moment it gets warm again, we'll try to do as much outside as we can. Thank you.